shortly before midnight on July 18th, 2016, and this is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. We have just concluded, or almost concluded, the first day of the 2016 Republican National Convention, otherwise known as the dumpster fire. And it has been quite a spectacle. The question you have to ask yourself is it possible to lose a presidential election in a single day? I don't know the answer to that, quite frankly, but if it is possible at all, it may reflect what Donald Trump has been doing, what he has actually been carrying out here in recent hours. It has been a terrible day for the Trump campaign, and they have severely damaged their election prospects, really for no reason at all except their own ineptitude. Now, the Republican Party of today, of course, in contrast even to recent decades, believes in absolutely nothing. It is an ideological void, and the only language it understands is money, power, influence peddling, and the like. And in particular, the so-called Christian evangelicals inside the Republican Party no longer believe in anything. Their faith has wilted, and they accept a playboy, a libertine, a debauchee like Donald Trump. This indicates that they have forgotten about Christ, and they now worship, essentially, Mammon, right, the god of riches. Today was the first day of the convention. And since there is no ideology left, right, the ideology of William Buckley and of supply side economics and other sources, most of that has simply been chucked overboard. So what they did today was to devote the evening especially to fear mongering, including some pretty extreme accusations. Of course, that's his stock in trade. So now, what was this big earthquake? These are some things that have happened today that haven't happened, to my knowledge, since 1948 or 1968, or in any sense, a good long time. You'll remember that there's a faction of about 1/5 to 1/4 of the Republican Party, which does not accept the intruder, Donald Trump. And there has been an effort under various names, right? Never Trump, Stop Trump, and so forth, to try to prevent him from getting the nomination. Most of these have proven unworkable because they don't have a candidate to put up against him, and then therefore they don't have the money. But last week something did emerge. In the Rules Committee, you'll remember that there's a convention, but then there's also the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee, along with the Platform Committee, and the Credentials Committee, those are the three that do a lot of the work of the convention. A group appeared inside the Rules Committee. These were generally former Cruz delegates who wanted to stop Trump, and the way they wanted to do that was a conscience clause, which would say that if you're a delegate to the Republican National Convention, you are not bound, and you can vote your conscience even on the first ballot. There are some important legal precedents which say exactly that no state can arrest you for voting one way or the other, especially if the election is held outside of that state. So this was the group. They called themselves Delegates Unbound or Free the Delegates. One important spokeswoman was Kendall Unruh, a very energetic teacher from Colorado. A lot of this was centered in the Colorado delegation, where you'll remember Trump was screaming that there was a free process of electing a lot of these the delegates. So there was a fight inside the Rules Committee last Thursday, last Friday, in order to get this conscience clause put through. Now, it's not clear what that would have led to. The Republican Party, the Republican National Committee, under the emerging strongman or party boss, Reince Priebus, of Wisconsin, came in with Gestapo tactics preemptively. And their dirty trick, was to say that the copy machine was no longer functioning, and therefore certain resolutions could not be duplicated and delivered to the delegates. Notice what we're getting, and that's the theme of the whole day. The dirty tricks of the Nixon years are being brought back precisely by personnel left over from the CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President. In other words, the Watergate burglars and their rear echelon and so forth. And the names there are Paul Manafort, the dictator of the Trump campaign, Trump's proconsul, and of course Roger Stone, who has the relations with the scurrilous libertarian and other fronts. So there was already a lot of bad blood in that Rules Committee from states that thought that they had a right to say something about the way in which voting was going. Now this morning, Paul Manafort, who looks like somebody out of the Godfather saga, boasted that he had crushed the opposition. I'm sorry, this is not unifying a party. This is going to lead to much rancor, much resentment. But that's Manafort for you, right? The torturer's lobby. He boasted that he crushed the opposition, and he said that the convention would be devoted, in my terms, to a personality cult of Donald Trump, obviously. Tell us all about the man. Forget about program, forget about strategy, forget about the long-term interest of the United States. Let's go on an orgy of personality cultism around Donald Trump. Manafort also may have already thrown the election away in that same press conference on his own, without the help of anybody else, because he was asked, what about Governor Kasich of Ohio, the man, the governor who, in whose state this is being held, who is boycotting the convention, as indeed other Ohio elected Republican officials are boycotting the Republican National Convention because they don't want to get within a furlong of Donald Trump, right? They want to keep some daylight between themselves and Trump. Now, the idiocy of this is amazing. Manafort then said, Kasich is an embarrassment. He's an embarrassment to himself, and he's an embarrassment to his state. Now, if there is one key strategic point where Trump would have to concentrate all of his schmooze, all of his patronage, it would be to try to win the good affections of Kasich. Kasich proved during the elections that he had an effective machine which could deliver Ohio, in this case to him, even in the face of the Trump challenge. Now we know the rule has always been no Republican enters the White House without having won Ohio. And here we see the thuggish Paul Manafort of the Trump campaign essentially saying, I'm going to pick a fight with the governor of Ohio, when he should have done everything to finesse that, to schmooze it, and to find some way to say something nice about Kasich. So this is already, that could already be decisive right there. That could be the kiss of death for the entire Trump effort, but there's much more. The anti-Trump forces, and I probably shouldn't say anti-Trump, but I will because it's clear. The anti-Trump forces wanted to then force some kind of a floor debate about this question of whether the delegates are bound or unbound, whether they can vote their consciences or not. However, since there was no minority report coming out of the Rules Committee from last week, the only path available to the anti-Trump forces was to force a roll call vote on the report coming from the Rules Committee, which was to keep the rules the way Trump wanted them, and also the way Reince Priebus and the Republican National Committee wanted them. In this case, some of this is anti-Trump animus, but there's also a powerful current of actual, well, people who call themselves conservatives. In my book, of course, they're reactionaries, but maybe let's call them classical reactionaries. We can be nice to them up to this point. And they felt that there was too much centralization, that the Republican Party had veered towards too much top-down, as a result of the Ron Paul challenge of 2012, where they felt that they had to crack down, which they did. So what happens with this, and I have to tell you, I know this because I've done it myself. In 1992, I, with some others, went around to various state delegations at the Democratic National Committee in Democratic National Convention in New York City in 1992, and we got more than half the delegates to demand a floor debate and a roll call vote on the death penalty. That was what I was working on. We went down to federal court twice. The Democratic National Committee sent a lawyer, and they said, look, judge, federal judge, we are a private association, and you can't force us to obey our own laws. So it's clear there's no legal recourse. That became clear. Maybe the precedent they're working on today is the one that we established in 1992. But there's no legal recourse. However, there's a political penalty if they do this in a way which is too arrogant, which is exactly what Trump did today. It's so edifying. So the goal was to get a roll call vote. Simply, and people don't know what that is because they've never seen it. I think even the MSNBC journalist who was trying to organize this didn't realize what a roll call vote was. It means they start with Alabama, and then Alabama says the great state of Alabama casts 5 votes for the old rules and 20 votes for the new rules, and it goes all the way to Wyoming. Takes a couple of hours. On the other hand, this is what a convention is, and the people in the delegations love it because they get to be on TV, at least a couple of them. So by the end of the morning, the anti-Trump forces, and especially Kendall Unruh, who was in cahoots with MSNBC, said that they had gotten half of the delegate votes or more. They had gone over the 50% in 11 states. Now, according to the Republican rules, you need 7 states. You need to get more than half in 7 states. They got them in 11 states. So today they were in good shape under formal democracy to try to force this roll call vote. However, the party secretary went AWOL. The lady who is supposed to be the secretary of the Republican National Committee was nowhere to be found. So they couldn't serve these papers on her saying, look here, here are the signatures of more than half of 11 delegations. And needless to say, while this charming lady was AWOL, what was going on was arm twisting, thuggery, threats, Gestapo tactics, to coin a phrase used by Manafort. He knows what it is. Gestapo tactics were being used to get these poor delegates to take back their signatures. So at this point, the action on the floor in the plenum reaches the point of the report of the Rules Committee. So the Rules Committee says, we want the rules that Trump wants, and therefore we urge you to vote for those. Then there was a voice vote. The chair, a hack, not Priebus, who did not want to be the one doing this because this would have made him a lot of enemies, right? Trump should have thought of this too. This hack, whose name I do not know, said, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, the motion is carried, and off we go to the next point. At that point, pandemonium in the hall, pandemonium. The kind of thing you used to see in these old conventions when they'd have demonstrations in the aisles when one of their guys was nominated. But this time it was roll call vote, and they wanted it, and they wouldn't back down. Then, however, the Priebus forces came up with this idea of saying, well, you gave us a certain number of states, but we have now found that you have dipped below the 50% in enough states so that you no longer have 50% in 7 states. And at that point, they then moved on. Notice, Gestapo tactics once again. There's no proof of this. In other words, where's the written documentation? The anti-Trump forces came with actual signatures on paper, which was then duplicated. So everybody could see who those were. They were then targeted. But we still haven't seen, as far as I know, the paper of the various people saying, I hereby rescind or remove or abrogate my signature from this thing. So you get the idea. It's there's a bad scene. Now, some of the states that were involved, let me just mention these states because this is something that's going to come back to haunt Trump in November. The District of Columbia, Minnesota, Utah, Iowa, Colorado, Washington, Maine, Virginia, Wyoming. All of those states were at one time or another during the course of the midday in this category of more than half of the delegates wanted at least a roll call vote, so you could see where the party stood. By the way, the estimate is that between 400 and 600 delegates, a lot of them coming from the Cruz camp, which is now broken up. These are anti-Trump and or want to have a roll call vote. They want to see where people stand. And that's about, give or take, 20%, 1/5 of the 2,500 or so delegates, depending on the way you count it. Now, what then happened was unprecedented. I don't think it's happened in the Democratic Party. I think 1948 is the last big walkout, the Dixiecrats, Strom Thurmond. Maybe 1968, some anti-war Democrats walked out of the Chicago convention, right? I was out in the streets getting gassed by the National Guard and running away from Mayor Daley's police. But a large part, practically the entire Colorado delegation walked out. The Iowa delegation walked out. Others walked out. And the most eloquent of these was Republican Senator, former Senator, Gordon Humphrey of New Hampshire. So this old, dignified, liberal Republican from the Granite State had said he had called Trump a sick sociopath in his comments before the convention. Now, on this occasion, he was asked by, I guess, MSNBC, what happened when you tried to get the attention of the chair? And he says, I was shouted down. Shouted down by whom? And he says, by brown shirts. By brown shirts. And then they ask him, what do you mean? It's clear enough, but what do you mean by brown shirts? And he said, people who think like fascists. People who act like fascists. Good for you, Gordon Humphrey. Other people involved in this. Ken Cuccinelli was he was the Attorney General of Virginia, right? He was an important statewide official, well known around here. He threw down his delegate credentials and he said they cheated, they lied, right? It's Priebus. Ken Buck of Colorado, a classical reactionary, was also extremely upset. Mike Lee is a senator on active duty in the Senate of Utah. He represents the Mormon establishment. And we know from Romney and from others that the Mormon establishment simply does not like Trump. And he didn't win Utah in the primary. And a couple of others of these. So you can see what happened. This was a big deal. And indeed, I sampled some of the reactionary radio commentary. Mark Levin, for example. They're very upset because they really wanted this question of the centralization solved. It was even beyond Trump or non-Trump. They wanted to say the next convention has to have this decent way of taking people's opinions into effect. Now, this is really stupid by Manafort and by Trump. By the time we got to the floor today, it was clear that even if the anti-Trump and anti-centralization, anti-Priebus forces had been able to force a vote, they would never win that vote. And even if they had, it would all just then go back to the Rules Committee, and they would have to come up with some other deal. And it's very unlikely this could ever go ultimately so far as to kick out Trump. Therefore, the smart play, Manafort, Trump, would have been to say, okay, guys, you want to let off some steam, You want to make a show that you don't like Trump, go ahead and do it, because you're going to lose anyway. And then at the end of that, maybe you'll feel better. You'll say to yourself, well, we gave it everything and we just didn't have the votes. But Trump is too little inside, right? He's a very little fellow. He's always that 10 or 12-year-old boy that was caught by his father buying knives in these sleazy novelty stores around Times Square. Later in the evening, it became the hour of irrationality, the politics of fear, fear-mongering, and in particular, one grieving mother who stood up there and said, I'm accusing Hillary Clinton of murdering my son because she gave me a false story after he was dead about what had caused the Benghazi events. Now, obviously, this is irrationalism. This is the language of mental disturbance. I'm sorry. You can't blame somebody for murder on account of a statement they made after the deceased had departed this world. So I think this was a cynical example of Trump and Manafort and Priebus using the grief of this unfortunate lady to try to get some political traction. Plus, as we know, and I know it perhaps better than anybody, the Benghazi event was caused by stand-down orders. Yes, there were stand-down orders, and they came from neocon General David Petraeus and from, presumably also a neocon General, Carter Ham of the U.S. African Command. Petraeus had the CIA paramilitaries in Benghazi because he was the head of the CIA, and then Carter Ham had the jets at Sigonella, Italy, an hour or an hour and a half away. Trump is attempting to ride the law and order backlash. And here we see essentially what we have forecast, which was, and we're seeing it, a continuous strategy of tension, similar to the NATO program launched in Italy in the fall of 1969 to break the strike wave of the hot autumn then on the Italian peninsula, to break that and then to set it up for an authoritarian government. That's the strategy of tension. And it culminates in an October surprise. Rachel Maddow tonight, for some reason, mentioned October surprise in the context of the Benghazi event. And that's exactly what that was. That was supposed to be an October surprise for the 2012 election. What's left now for the anti-Trump forces? Well, they can simply leave. They can walk out. I should have mentioned that when the Colorado delegation and others, we'll find out over time who else, but the Colorado delegation for sure walked out. And that fulfills the minimum definition of a split in the party. In other words, if any part of that convention walks out, that is a potential split. And we'll see what happens tomorrow. There are reports now overnight that Priebus is kicking out the protesting delegates and putting in puppet delegates, which he can then seat tomorrow. And at that point, you'll have a zombie delegation from Colorado. Only zombies vote for Trump. So they can walk out. They can also put up somebody else for vice president because they're not pledged to anybody for vice president. Their only pledge is to vote for Trump, at least according to the stricter or I think wrong interpretation. But the claim has always been only the presidency, not these procedural votes and not the vice presidency. So they could do that. There's also the fact that the Republican rules refer to voting for somebody else. It doesn't say that you can't abstain or vote blank ballot. I don't know. There are all sorts of ways you can get out of that without casting your vote for the odious Trump. So comic relief on the side, Roger Stone and some libertarians. They were going to have a big march, and it turns out to have fallen flat, at least as far as today is concerned. 200 have appeared right after all that money spent and all that hot air. There were some bikers for Trump, and they were making political statements. We will be talking more about Pence as an agent of the Koch brothers, or Koch brothers, as they say, giving themselves airs, but we don't have time for that tonight. The evening, I would say, was dominated by the defeatism and pessimism of Trump, because he is inherently a defeatist, pessimistic, alarmist, divisive, disuniting candidate. So some observers said it looks like a death cult. I guess that's about right. And that would be Benghazi, Fast and Furious, anybody who had a relative killed in a robbery or a crash with an illegal alien was welcome up there. So now we're left with two final notes. Let's see. First, two good quotes. In victory, magnanimity, but not Donald Trump, right? He could have been magnanimous to those defeated Cruz people in the Free the Delegates. He wouldn't do it. And therefore, one of them responded, the corpse of representative government lies dead on the floor. Well, fortunately, the Republican Party is doomed, is moribund, will be extinct, but that's not conclusive for the United States of America, right? We have other party, and that other party might become two parties. So what we're seeing is the strategy of tension and the October surprise. The last time the Republicans met in Cleveland and nominated a presidential candidate, it was Alf Landon, the governor of Kansas, I think. Landon Knox, Frank Knox, vice president, Alf Landon, president. That was 1936, and they went down to the biggest defeat, I think, of all in American history at the hands of Franklin D. Roosevelt. It was FDR's most successful and most radical campaign. And finally, if you're looking forward to the acceptance speech by Trump on Thursday evening, well, the rumors are that he's been studying Gordon Gekko's Greed is Good speech before the board and the annual meeting of Teldar Paper in the famous Oliver Stone movie, Wall Street. So it's Michael Douglas, Greed is Good, and we'll see something coming from Trump about that. Study this because the themes are uncannily similar. So it's now past midnight, or approaching midnight. So we want to wrap up. I thank you for your attention. We'll try to have a daily wrap-up in the evening around, perhaps earlier than this, but we'll try to have an evening or daily wrap-up for each of the 4 days of the Republican convention. And if that is feasible, we'll probably go on and do the same for the Democrats next week. So thank you for your attention. This has been Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C.